The massive German shepherd collapsed in a heap of matted fur and blood, her swollen belly heaving with each labored breath. For 3 miles through the merciless Colorado blizzard, she had followed the Tyler family, her paws leaving crimson prints in the virgin snow. Now, as darkness fell and temperatures plummeted, her strength finally gave out. 12-year-old Emma stopped first, turning to face the animal that had trailed them since the Christmas tree farm. The dog's amber eyes, once surely proud and alert, now pleaded with a desperation that transcended species. "My God," whispered Michael Tyler, kneeling despite the biting cold. "She's pregnant." Margaret, his 72-year-old mother, gasped as she spotted the fresh lacerations across the dog's flank. Deliberate, human cruelty carved into flesh. The dog trembled, then stretched her massive head toward Emma's small hand. Sometimes salvation comes with 4 paws and a broken spirit. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Tyler family cabin stood defiant against the approaching storm, a weathered testament to resilience nestled among snow-laden pines outside Boulder. 3 generations sheltered within its rough-hewn walls, each bearing wounds invisible to passing glances, but obvious in the heavy silence that often filled their shared space. Michael Tyler, at 55, wore the haunted expression common to combat medics who'd witnessed too much suffering. Early retirement hadn't been his choice. The nightmares and trembling hands had made that decision for him. Since losing his wife to cancer 2 years prior, he'd struggled to maintain their mountain home on his disability pension while raising Emma alone. The calendar on the refrigerator, marked with payment due dates, told its own story of financial desperation. Margaret Tyler occupied the converted sunroom downstairs, her arthritis-gnarled fingers clutching a worn photo album documenting a lifetime of nursing service. At 72, she'd never imagined ending up in that hellhole of a nursing home where Michael had found her 2 months ago. Neglected, malnourished, and heavily sedated. "Taking up space and resources," she often muttered, feeling the burden of dependence despite Michael's protestations. Emma, a wisp of a 12-year-old with her mother's chestnut hair, moved through the cabin like a ghost. The last complete sentence she'd spoken was at her mother's funeral. "When is Mom coming back?" Now she communicated through nods, written notes, and the occasional whisper that only Scout, their aging golden retriever, seemed to hear. Outside, radio forecasters warned of the century's worst blizzard approaching the Front Range. Michael eyed their dwindling supplies with concern, knowing the winding mountain road would soon become impassable. The Christmas tree they'd set out to find would have to be smaller this year, just like their holiday meal and the modest gifts hidden in his closet. The cabin's tight quarters magnified every tension. Margaret's constant reminders of how things used to be done grated against Michael's fragile patience. Emma's silence created a void everyone tried to fill with nervous chatter or forced cheerfulness. Only at the weekly veterans support meetings in town did Michael find momentary peace, surrounded by others who understood without explanation. But even that community couldn't ease the financial realities of medical bills, Margaret's ongoing care, and Emma's therapy sessions that insurance refused to cover. They were surviving, not living, until a bloodied shepherd appeared in their wake. The morning of December 22nd dawned with pristine snowfall and the promise of more to come. Michael had postponed their Christmas tree hunt as long as possible, hoping for a break in the forecasted weather pattern that never materialized. "We'll have to make do with whatever we can find close to Pearson's lot," Michael announced over breakfast. "Weather Service says we've got maybe 4 hours before the next system hits." Margaret nodded, sliding a plate of slightly burned pancakes toward Emma. "In my day, we cut trees from our own land. Didn't pay those highway robbery prices." Emma pushed the food around her plate, eyes downcast, as always. Scout's excited barking at the mention of going out brought a ghost of a smile to the girl's face. At least the aging retriever still found joy in small pleasures. The family bundled up against the biting cold, Michael helping Margaret navigate the icy porch steps while Emma secured Scout's leash. Their ancient Chevy truck protested the cold start but eventually rumbled to life. 20 minutes later they were trudging through ankle-deep snow at Pearson's tree farm, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Nothing too big," Michael reminded them, eyeing the modest trees in the back lot where prices dropped significantly. 7 feet max. They had just selected a modest blue spruce when Emma froze, her gaze fixed on something beyond the tree line. At first Michael saw nothing but shadows and snow. Then movement caught his eye, a dark shape weaving unsteadily between the distant pines. "Probably just a deer," Margaret said, but her voice trailed off as the shape emerged fully into view. The German shepherd was massive despite her emaciated condition, her pregnant belly a grotesque contrast to her protruding ribs. Blood matted the fur along her flank, leaving crimson droplets in the pristine snow. She kept a cautious distance, watching them with an intensity that seemed almost human. "She's following us," Margaret whispered as they loaded the tree. Sure enough, the dog shadowed their path, maintaining exactly 30 feet between them. Michael's instinct was clear and immediate. "We can't take in another animal. Scout's already costing us in medication, and a dog that size would eat us out of house and home. Not to mention she probably belongs to someone," Margaret added, though her eyes lingered sympathetically on the animal. 3 miles of slow driving later, with the shepherd somehow keeping pace despite her condition, the creature finally collapsed in their driveway. The snow around her darkened with blood. "Dad," Emma's voice, unused for so long, cracked with emotion. "Please help her." Michael and Margaret exchanged shocked glances at the sound of Emma's voice. That alone would have been enough to convince Michael, but the approaching storm sealed the decision. "The roads are already closing," the emergency dispatcher informed him when he called for animal control. "Earliest we could get someone out there would be tomorrow afternoon, maybe later." With Margaret's surprising support, no creature should suffer alone in weather like this. Michael carefully approached the injured animal. The moment he reached toward her, his sleeve riding up to reveal his military watch, the shepherd flinched violently, a low warning growl rumbling from her throat. "She's been abused," Michael realized, removing his jacket with its military patches. The dog's posture immediately relaxed. Dr. Anderson's answering service promised she would return their call, but with power lines already down in parts of the county, Michael knew they couldn't wait. 20 years of military medical training took over as he assessed the animal's wounds. Deep lacerations consistent with a beating, at least 2 broken ribs, and severe malnutrition despite her advanced pregnancy. "Emma, get my medical kit from the basement. Margaret, boil some water and find clean towels," Michael instructed. "Scout, kennel." The old golden retriever reluctantly retreated to his crate, watching the newcomer with suspicious eyes. As Michael cleaned the first of many wounds, the shepherd's amber eyes never left his face. There was something in that gaze, not just animal pain, but a profound understanding that chilled him to the bone. "What happened to you, girl?" he whispered. "Who did this to you?" Outside, the promised storm descended in earnest, sealing them off from the world beyond. Little did Michael know that this desperate animal at his kitchen table would change all their lives forever. By morning, the blizzard had transformed their mountain property into an alien landscape of towering drifts and ice-coated trees. Michael awakened to the sound of Emma's voice, still a startling novelty, as she spoke softly to the shepherd they'd bedded down on blankets near the wood stove. "You're safe now, Shadow," she whispered, the name apparently decided sometime during the night. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Michael exchanged glances with his mother, both silently acknowledging the miracle of hearing Emma speak consecutive sentences for the first time in 2 years. The shepherd's condition had stabilized somewhat overnight, though Michael worried about potential internal injuries beyond his ability to diagnose. The Weather Service now classified the storm as life-threatening, with another front moving in by evening. How Dr. Anderson managed to navigate the treacherous roads remained a mystery, but her truck's appearance in their driveway around noon seemed nothing short of miraculous. "I'd have been here sooner," the veterinarian apologized, shaking snow from her parka, "but half the county's without power, and I had 3 emergency calls before yours." Her professional demeanor softened when she saw the shepherd. "Oh, you poor thing." Dr. Anderson's examination confirmed Michael's worst fears. Shadow was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from multiple fractures and infections. "She shouldn't even be alive, let alone have walked miles in this weather," she remarked, administering antibiotics and fluids. "Will her puppies survive?" Emma asked, hovering anxiously nearby. "She's carrying at least 6, maybe more," Dr. Anderson replied, moving her stethoscope across Shadow's swollen belly. "They're fighters, like their mama, but she needs proper nutrition immediately. I'll leave supplements." The discovery came while Dr. Anderson scanned for a microchip. "There's something tangled in her collar," she noted, gently working her fingers through the matted fur. What emerged left everyone speechless. A military-grade identification tag and 2 service medals, tarnished but unmistakable. "She's a military dog," Michael whispered, recognizing the insignia instantly. "Special Forces K9 unit." Dr. Anderson's scanner confirmed it. "Registered as Shadow, service number K97734, assigned to—" She frowned at the readout. "The information's incomplete. Looks like the database entry was redacted." Margaret, who had been unusually quiet all morning, suddenly gasped. "The helicopter! Turn that down," she cried, pointing to the weather report showing rescue operations in a nearby county. Michael quickly muted the television, but the damage was done. Shadow began trembling violently, eyes wild with panic, a high-pitched whine escaping her throat. "It's the sound," Margaret explained, her own hands shaking as she stroked Shadow's head. "I've seen it before in soldiers coming back from Vietnam. Certain sounds bring it all back." While Dr. Anderson continued treating Shadow, their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Tara Wilson from the local newspaper stood on their porch with a photographer. "Sorry to intrude," she said, "but word gets around fast in Boulder Creek. Is it true you've rescued a military service dog? Jeff Hutchins at the gas station said Dr. Anderson was headed here with emergency supplies." Michael attempted to politely dismiss them, but the reporter persisted. "People would want to know this story, especially during Christmas. A pregnant military hero, rescued in a blizzard." The commotion attracted unexpected attention. A rugged pickup truck with veterans' license plates pulled into their driveway, its driver navigating the snow with determined precision. The tall, weathered man who emerged moved with military bearing despite his limp. "Name's Jack Reynolds," he announced without preamble. "I've been searching for my German Shepherd for 3 weeks. Description matches what folks at the diner were saying." Michael instinctively stepped between the stranger and the door. "Your dog?" The one beaten half to death and left to wander in a blizzard? Reynolds' expression hardened. I'd never harm that dog. She saved my life in Afghanistan. Yet she panics at the sight of a military uniform, Michael countered, gesturing to Shadow's reaction when Reynolds' service jacket became visible. She has broken ribs and whip marks. That wasn't me, Reynolds insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. Please, I just need to see her. The confrontation might have escalated further had Margaret not intervened. Both of you, stand down, she commanded with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. This isn't helping that dog or her puppies. Inside, Emma had wrapped protective arms around Shadow, whose entire body trembled with fear. The television flickered as the power surged, the first warning that the main electrical grid was failing. That night, with Reynolds reluctantly departed after leaving his contact information, Margaret's screams woke the household. Michael found his mother thrashing in bed, caught in the grip of nightmares he'd never heard her mention. "Don't bring any more to my tent," she sobbed, still half asleep. "I can't save them all. So much blood." As Michael comforted her, the pieces began connecting. His mother's nursing service in Vietnam, Shadow's military background, the shared trauma that somehow bound woman and dog in ways he was only beginning to understand. Across the room, the emergency radio crackled with warnings of worsening conditions. The weatherman's voice competed with static. Helicopter rescue operation suspended. Record snowfall. Residents advised to prepare for extended isolation. Shadow's ears pricked at the word helicopter, her body tensing instantly. Emma, sleeping beside her new companion, instinctively tightened her protective embrace. Outside, the lights of another vehicle moved slowly up their driveway, too large to be Dr. Anderson returning. Michael watched through frosted windows as the county utility truck arrived with warning. Rolling blackouts would begin within hours. The sanctuary they'd offered Shadow was becoming increasingly precarious, and somewhere out there, Jack Reynolds was surely planning his next attempt to reclaim her. Shadow's condition deteriorated rapidly as December 23rd dawned. Michael awoke to Emma's urgent whispers, finding the shepherd's temperature dangerously elevated, her massive body trembling with fever despite the blankets heaped upon her. "She's burning up," Michael confirmed, veterinary antibiotics already proving inadequate against whatever infection raged through Shadow's battered body. More alarming were the intermittent contractions rippling across her swollen belly, far too early for healthy delivery. "We need Dr. Anderson," Margaret insisted, already attempting to reach the veterinarian on their landline. The cellular network had failed overnight, as cell towers succumbed to ice accumulation and wind damage. Emma, breaking her long silence with increasing frequency, positioned herself as Shadow's constant guardian. The transformation in the girl was nothing short of remarkable. Where she had once moved like a ghost through their lives, she now spoke with determination, directing her words to Shadow, but allowing her family to overhear. "Dr. Kate will come back," Emma assured the suffering animal, stroking Shadow's ears with gentle fingers. "She promised." When Shadow's restlessness increased, Emma retrieved her mother's weathered copy of Black Beauty from the bookshelf, a choice that struck Michael as eerily appropriate. His daughter's voice, unused for so long, gained strength as she read aloud the tale of another animal who endured cruelty yet maintained its noble spirit. "Listen, Shadow," Emma urged during a particularly difficult contraction. "He survived too. You're just as brave." Michael caught his mother wiping away tears as she prepared warm compresses for Shadow's flank. Something about the animal had penetrated Margaret's carefully maintained emotional defenses, a connection he couldn't fully understand. By mid-morning, the local radio station was broadcasting a human interest story about the heroic military dog rescued in Boulder Creek. Despite the hazardous conditions, 3 different news vans attempted the treacherous mountain road, only to be turned back by county roadblocks. "This is ridiculous," Michael muttered, hanging up the phone after the 7th journalist call. "How did they even get this number?" "Small towns," Margaret replied with a knowing sigh. "Besides, people need good stories during bad times. Always been that way." The day brought unexpected clarity regarding Shadow's military past. As Emma read, Shadow's ears suddenly perked at a specific phrase: rushing water. The shepherd attempted to rise despite her weakness, whining urgently. "She's responding to the flood description," Margaret observed, "like she's being called to duty." Michael's internet search on his dwindling laptop battery revealed what the fragmented microchip data had obscured. Shadow had indeed served in Afghanistan, but her most celebrated work came after military retirement. 2 years earlier, record flooding had devastated counties west of Denver. Among the rescue teams deployed was Shadow, credited with locating 17 survivors trapped by rising waters. "Look, Emma," Michael pointed to a newspaper photo showing a younger, healthier Shadow receiving a civilian hero's medal, her handler proudly standing beside her. The handler's face was partially obscured, but his military bearing was unmistakable. "That's Mr. Reynolds," Emma whispered. Michael grudgingly conceded the possibility that Reynolds' claim might be legitimate, though it explained neither Shadow's injuries nor her terror reaction to the man. The phone's ring interrupted their research, a local veterans support coordinator Michael knew from weekly meetings. "Hell of a storm, eh?" Frank Chambers began, without preamble. "Listen, word's out about your military K-9. Got 6 vets asking how they can help. Some have generator access, others offering supplies. This means something to a lot of us, Mike." Michael's instinct to refuse assistance warred with practical necessity. The power had been flickering all morning, and Shadow needed medical care beyond his capabilities. "We could use medications," he admitted, "and maybe a generator backup if things get worse." "Consider it done," Frank promised. "Veterans take care of their own, 2-legged or 4. As predicted, their power failed completely around noon. Scout, who had maintained a jealous distance from Shadow, unexpectedly positioned himself beside the shepherd's makeshift bed, growling whenever Emma stepped away. The golden retriever's protective instinct surprised them all, especially when he began bringing his own toys and placing them beside Shadow. "Will wonders never cease?" Margaret murmured, watching the animals. Old Scout's appointed himself guardian. Shadow's fever peaked as darkness fell, her breathing labored and panting. Michael maintained cold compresses while Margaret prepared a broth of chicken and rice, hoping to provide some nourishment. Emma continued reading, her voice growing hoarse but determined. During a rare moment alone while Emma napped, Margaret approached Michael with uncharacteristic hesitation. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her weathered hands twisting nervously in her lap. "About the nightmares." Michael waited silently, recognizing the difficulty this proud woman had in revealing vulnerability. "I never told you much about my nursing service in Vietnam," she continued. "Some things weren't fit for a child to hear, and later it seemed best left buried." The story emerged haltingly, of field hospitals overwhelmed during the Tet Offensive, of Margaret working 72-hour shifts, of the military dogs brought in with their wounded handlers. There was one shepherd, she recalled, eyes distant with memory. Sergeant, they called him. He'd been hit rescuing his handler from a firefight. Both came in together, both dying. That dog wouldn't leave the soldier's side, not even for treatment. Michael understood suddenly why his mother had championed Shadow from the beginning. You see him in her. I couldn't save them then, Margaret admitted, her voice breaking. Maybe this time. Their conversation halted as Scout's warning bark announced an approaching vehicle. Michael grabbed the emergency flashlight, pointing its beam through frost-covered windows to illuminate Jack Reynolds' truck navigating the snow-choked driveway. This time, Reynolds wasn't alone. An older woman accompanied him, along with a balding man Michael recognized as Judge Hamilton from the county court. More surprising was the thick folder Reynolds carried, official-looking documents and what appeared to be photographs. "I don't want trouble," Reynolds began when Michael reluctantly opened the door. "I brought proof of my relationship with Shadow, and witnesses who can verify my character." The judge nodded gravely. "Mr. Reynolds approached me officially, Michael. I believe you should hear him out." Inside, Shadow's reaction to Reynolds remained fearful, but less panicked than before. Perhaps her weakness had overcome her terror, or perhaps something in Reynolds's gentle tone penetrated her defenses. Reynolds spread photographs across the kitchen table, illuminated by lanterns and candles. Shadow with her military unit in Afghanistan, Shadow at training exercises, Shadow at Reynolds' home, playing with children. "She lived with me for 7 years, Reynolds explained, voice thick with emotion. "After our deployment ended, I adopted her officially. We worked rescue operations together until last month." "Then explain her condition," Michael demanded. "The broken ribs, the whip marks, the terror." Reynolds' face contorted with grief and shame. "My son, Brian. He returned from his 3rd tour in Syria 8 months ago. PTSD, addiction issues. He's not the boy I raised. When I checked into the VA hospital for back surgery last month, Shadow was supposed to stay with my sister, but Brian took her instead." The judge confirmed the timeline. "Jack filed a police report 3 weeks ago when he discovered what happened. There's a warrant out for Brian Reynolds' arrest." "Brian was Shadow's secondary handler overseas," Reynolds continued. "She trusts him, or did. By the time I tracked them to his place, he'd disappeared. Neighbors reported hearing animal abuse, but no one saw Shadow. I've been searching ever since." Emma, who had awakened during the conversation, stood protectively beside Shadow. "She chose us," the girl insisted. "She walked miles to find us." "And I'm grateful she did," Reynolds acknowledged. "You saved her life. But I need to make this right. For her, and for the puppies. They're descendants of an extraordinary bloodline of service dogs. The uncomfortable standoff might have continued indefinitely had Shadow not suddenly yelped in pain, her body convulsing with a contraction more violent than previous ones. "Something's wrong," Margaret declared, moving immediately to Shadow's side. "This isn't normal labor progression." Reynolds approached cautiously, speaking in a low, commanding voice that seemed to penetrate Shadow's fear. "Easy, girl. Stand down. You're safe." To everyone's surprise, Shadow's trembling subsided slightly at the familiar commands. Reynolds turned to Michael. "Please, let me help. We trained together for years. She knows my voice." Necessity overcame suspicion as Shadow's condition rapidly deteriorated. "She needs a veterinarian," Michael admitted. "But the roads?" "My truck has chains and a winch," Reynolds countered. "I can get Dr. Anderson here." As Reynolds prepared to depart, The sound of multiple engines rumbled up the driveway. 3 pickup trucks bearing veterans' insignia appeared through the swirling snow, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Frank Chambers led the convoy, carrying battery-powered medical equipment and a portable generator. "Cavalry's here," Frank announced, then froze upon seeing Reynolds. "Jack? What the hell are you doing here?" "You two know each other?" Michael asked, confused. "Afghanistan 2010, Frank replied, eyes narrowing. "What's going on, Jack?" The veteran's unexpected arrival created momentary chaos, explanations overlapping with Shadow's increasingly distressed sounds. Among the volunteers was a former veterinary technician who immediately recognized the signs of impending labor. "Those contractions are too close together for her condition," the man warned after examining Shadow. "She's in distress." As the veterans established emergency lighting and heat sources, their military efficiency a stark contrast to the storm's chaos outside, Michael observed Shadow's reaction to their presence. While their uniforms initially triggered trembling, their gentle, methodical movements seemed to reassure her. Perhaps she recognized kindred souls, individuals who understood trauma because they'd lived through it themselves. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts as the storm intensified to near whiteout conditions. Power restoration estimates stretched from days to potentially weeks for more isolated properties like theirs. Without the veterans' intervention, Shadow's chances would have been minimal. Reynolds, preparing to depart for Dr. Anderson's clinic, paused beside Michael. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "Brian's been spotted in Boulder Creek. Someone recognized his truck at the motel on Route 9. "You think he's looking for Shadow?" "I know he is," Reynolds replied grimly. "And he believes she's his property." The implications hung in the frigid air between them, a new threat potentially more dangerous than the storm itself. If Shadow's abuser was nearby and desperate enough to venture out in these conditions, what might he do to reclaim his victim? As darkness deepened and the wind howled through mountain passes with banshee ferocity, the Tyler home transformed into an impromptu operations center. Veterans maintained communication through emergency radios, formulating contingency plans for Shadow's delivery and security. Emma, exhausted but refusing to leave Shadow's side, finally succumbed to sleep with her hand resting on the shepherd's neck. Margaret covered her granddaughter with a quilt, then positioned herself on Shadow's other side. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered to the dog, words meant equally for herself. "We've got you now." Michael watched the impromptu family tableau. His daughter, his mother, the wounded shepherd, and the loyal retriever curled protectively around them all. Reynolds' revelation about his son had complicated an already complex situation, but one thing remained crystal clear. Shadow had chosen them for a reason. Outside, the century's worst blizzard raged unabated, sealing them together in their mountain sanctuary or their trap, depending on whether Reynolds returned with Dr. Anderson before Brian Reynolds discovered Shadow's whereabouts. As midnight approached on Christmas Eve, Shadow's labor intensified in earnest. The puppies were coming, ready or not, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. Christmas Eve arrived with an eerie stillness. The storm had temporarily abated, leaving behind a crystalline world where temperatures plummeted to dangerous lows. Inside the Tyler home, the generator Frank's veterans had provided sputtered and died at precisely 2:17 a.m., plunging them into darkness broken only by emergency lanterns and firelight. "That's it for the backup," Frank announced grimly. "Fuel lines frozen solid. Main generator won't restart." Michael checked the indoor thermometer, 47 degrees and falling. Without electrical heat, the cabin would quickly become dangerously cold, especially for Shadow and her unborn puppies. Margaret was already distributing emergency blankets from the veterans' supplies, her nurse's efficiency undiminished by age. "Dad?" Emma's voice carried from Shadow's makeshift bed near the fireplace. "Something's happening." Michael found Shadow panting heavily, her massive body trembling with unmistakable contractions. A clear fluid pooled beneath her. Her water had broken. The birth was imminent, weeks earlier than ideal for her weakened condition. "Reynolds and Dr. Anderson aren't going to make it," Michael realized aloud, checking his watch. They'd been gone nearly 6 hours in what should have been a 3-hour round trip. "We have to assume they're stranded somewhere." "Then we deliver these puppies ourselves," Margaret stated firmly, already arranging clean towels. "I've assisted with enough births, human and otherwise." Michael hadn't performed obstetric procedures since his deployment, and never on a canine. His medical kit contained basic instruments, but nothing specifically designed for veterinary use. "Frank, radio the emergency channel. See if there's any vet or animal expert we can consult by radio." As Frank established communications, Michael inventoried their resources: sutures, antibiotics, rudimentary pain medication, sterile gloves, alcohol. Woefully inadequate, but they had no choice. Shadow's first contraction strong enough to produce real progress came at 3:24 a.m. Her agonized whimper tore through the cabin's hushed atmosphere, prompting Scout to howl mournfully in response. "Easy, girl," Michael soothed, positioning himself to assist. "We're right here with you." Emma stationed herself at Shadow's head, speaking constant reassurances. The girl, who hadn't spoken for 2 years, now produced a steady stream of encouragement, stroking the shepherd's ears with gentle fingers. "You can do this, Shadow. You're the bravest dog in the world." Margaret prepared warm water and arranged their limited medical supplies with professional precision. "First puppy should present head first, front paws alongside," she instructed. "If not, we may need to assist." The first contraction, strong enough to show a puppy's emergence, started at 3:47 a.m. Shadow's body tensed with extraordinary effort, her amber eyes wide with pain and fear. "I see the amniotic sac," Michael announced, hands steady despite the pressure. "And a head. Good presentation." What followed was 30 minutes of intense struggle before the first puppy, a male with Shadow's coloring, emerged into the world. Margaret cleared its airways with practiced efficiency, while Michael helped Shadow with the umbilical cord. "He's breathing," Emma announced triumphantly, as tiny squeaks emanated from the squirming bundle. Their momentary celebration ended abruptly as Shadow began another intense contraction. The second puppy arrived more quickly, followed closely by a third. Between the 4th and 5th deliveries, Shadow's strength visibly faltered. Her breathing became labored, her pushing less effective. Michael administered a small amount of glucose solution, hoping to provide essential energy for the final deliveries. "She's hemorrhaging," Margaret warned, noticing the increasing blood. "Nothing severe yet, but we need to monitor closely." The cabin's temperature had dropped to 41 degrees. Despite the roaring fire, the bitter cold penetrated every corner. Frank's veterans maintained a rotation, bringing in firewood while monitoring radio communications. No word had come from Reynolds or Dr. Anderson. The 6th puppy, smaller than its siblings, required Michael's direct intervention, its position slightly askew. As he gently manipulated the tiny form, Shadow's exhausted eyes fixed on his face with complete trust, a stark contrast to her initial fear days earlier. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the eaves with banshee-like moans. The brief respite from the storm was ending. The sudden pounding on their door at 4:52 a.m. startled everyone. Frank's hand moved instinctively to his waistband before he remembered he wasn't armed. "Tyler, open up!" The voice that bellowed through the door was slurred but demanding. Michael peered through the frost-covered window to see a man swaying on their porch, mid-30s, unshaven, wearing a military-style jacket too light for the conditions. His truck, parked haphazardly in the driveway, bore the same veteran's plates as Jack Reynolds' vehicle. "It's Brian," Frank confirmed grimly. "Jack's son." "He's intoxicated," Margaret observed, "and likely hypothermic, judging by his attire." Michael hesitated, torn between humanitarian instinct and protective caution. Shadow's reaction settled the question. She'd gone completely rigid, her ears flat against her skull, a low warning growl emanating from her throat despite her exhaustion. "We need to keep him out," Michael decided, "at least until we understand his intentions." The pounding intensified. "I know she's in there. That's my dog, and those are my puppies. Military property." Emma's arms tightened protectively around Shadow and the newborns. "He's lying. They're not his." Frank positioned himself near the door with two other veterans. "We've got this, Michael. You focus on Shadow." The confrontation might have remained verbal had the seventh puppy not chosen that moment to present, breach position, requiring Michael's complete concentration. Shadow's strength was nearly gone, her massive body trembling with exhaustion rather than contractions. "She needs to push," Margaret urged, pressing gently on Shadow's abdomen. "The puppy's stuck." A tremendous crash interrupted their efforts as the door's hinges gave way. Brian Reynolds stumbled inside on a blast of Arctic air, his eyes wild and unfocused, his movements erratic. The smell of whiskey permeated the space around him. "Stand down, Brian," Frank barked, using the commanding tone of a senior officer. "You're out of line, soldier." Brian ignored him, his gaze fixed on Shadow and the puppies. "Government property," he slurred. "Worth thousands each. They're mine by right." "Your father's been searching for her," Michael said, trying to reason with the clearly unstable man while still attending to Shadow's delivery. "He's worried about you." "Dad's weak," Brian spat. "Always was. Shadow was wasted on him. A weapon turned into a house pet." Two veterans moved to restrain Brian, but he was younger and fueled by substances and rage. He shoved past them with surprising strength, advancing toward Shadow's corner. What happened next occurred so rapidly that Michael could barely track the sequence. Despite her exhaustion, despite the puppy still partially delivered, Shadow somehow found the strength to rise. Her massive form positioned itself between Brian and Emma, hackles raised, teeth bared in unmistakable warning. "Shadow, heel!" Brian commanded, his voice taking on a different quality, harder, military precise. For a heartbeat, Shadow's protective stance wavered, old training warring with new loyalty. Then Emma's hand touched her flank, and the shepherd's resolve visibly solidified. "She's not yours anymore," Emma stated with quiet certainty. "She chose us." Brian's face contorted with rage. He reached inside his jacket, producing something that glinted metallically in the firelight. Frank reacted instantly, diving toward Brian with two other veterans. The ensuing struggle sent them crashing into the wood stove, dislodging the pipe and sending smoke billowing into the cabin. Margaret grabbed Emma, pulling her toward the door while Michael struggled to move Shadow and her newborns to safety. Through the chaos came the most welcome sound Michael could imagine, the roar of engines and flashing lights outside. Jack Reynolds burst through the broken doorway with Dr. Anderson close behind, both taking in the scene with professional rapidity. "Brian, stand down!" Jack's voice carried the weight of parental authority and military command. "This ends now. The distraction provided the moment Frank needed to finally subdue the younger Reynolds, pinning him face down as Jack approached. "Dad?" Brian sobbed, the fight suddenly leaving him. "I can't stop seeing them. The children in Fallujah, the ones we couldn't save. Shadow was there. She remembers, too." Jack's weathered face reflected his son's pain. "I know, son. I see them, too." As the veteran secured Brian and repaired the wood stove, Dr. Anderson moved directly to Shadow. "She's in distress," she announced, examining the partially delivered puppy. "We need to complete this birth immediately." Jack joined her, speaking in the calm, commanding tone that had guided Shadow through countless missions. "Task focus, Shadow. Complete your mission." Whether it was Jack's familiar commands or simply the last reserves of her extraordinary spirit, Shadow rallied for one final effort. The seventh puppy, tiniest of all, finally emerged into Margaret's waiting hands. "She's not breathing," Margaret reported, immediately beginning gentle chest compressions with her thumb. Dr. Anderson administered emergency medications to Shadow while Michael worked to control the hemorrhaging. The cabin had become a battlefield triage unit, each person focused on their life-saving tasks while the storm raged outside. At 5:33 a.m., Christmas morning, the portable generator Jack had brought sputtered to life, restoring precious heat and power to essential medical equipment. Dr. Anderson stabilized Shadow's condition, while Margaret successfully resuscitated the struggling puppy. Brian, now sedated in Jack's truck under Frank's supervision, had become a secondary concern to Shadow's survival. The shepherd's eyes remained fixed on Emma, who hadn't left her side throughout the ordeal. "She's going to make it," Dr. Anderson finally announced, relief evident in her voice. "She's the toughest patient I've ever treated." As dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, casting rose-gold light through frost-covered windows, Shadow curled protectively around her 7 miraculously living puppies. The threat had passed, the delivery completed against impossible odds. Jack Reynolds stood in the doorway watching his former partner with a mixture of pride and resignation. "She was always the best of us," he said quietly. "Even in the worst conditions, she never gave up on a mission." Michael nodded, understanding finally how this extraordinary animal had found them, not by random chance, but through the same determination that had made her a war hero and rescue legend. "Merry Christmas," Emma whispered, curled beside Shadow and her newborn family. For the first time in years, the words held genuine meaning in the Tyler household. The fleeting triumph of successful delivery evaporated with the weak morning light. By mid-morning on Christmas Day, the smallest male puppy, already struggling despite Margaret's dedicated care, began showing signs of respiratory distress. His tiny chest heaved with increasingly labored breaths, while Shadow watched with an awareness that seemed eerily human. "Congenital pneumonia," Dr. Anderson diagnosed grimly, her stethoscope confirming what they already feared. His lungs never fully cleared, the premature birth and Shadow's malnutrition during pregnancy. Emma refused to accept the prognosis, maintaining a vigil beside the failing puppy. "Fight," she whispered, cradling the tiny form in hands that had grown skilled at comfort over the past days. "Please fight." Shadow understood before any of them. She gently nosed her weakest offspring, whining softly, then looked at Emma with profound sorrow. The communication between girl and dog transcended words. Shadow was saying goodbye. Despite Dr. Anderson's interventions, antibiotics, oxygen from their dwindling medical supplies, warming pads powered by the sputtering generator, the smallest puppy took his final breath at 11:17 a.m. Emma's quiet tears fell onto his still warm body as Shadow keened a low, haunting sound that raised goosebumps on every human present. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Michael said, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. Margaret retreated to the kitchen, hands trembling as she gripped the counter. "The heat," she muttered, her voice breaking. "If I'd maintained better temperature control during delivery." Michael found his mother caught in the grip of memories he'd never fully understood. "This isn't Vietnam, Mom. You did everything humanly possible." "It's never enough," Margaret replied, her weathered face reflecting decades-old grief. "I lost 17 boys in one night during Tet. 17, some not much older than Emma. The generators failed then, too." Before Michael could respond, Dr. Anderson called urgently from the living room. The second smallest puppy, a female with unusual markings, had stopped nursing and begun the same labored breathing as her brother. "Secondary infection," Dr. Anderson explained, frustration evident in her professional demeanor. "Their immune systems are compromised from the maternal malnutrition and stress." Outside, Frank reported the storm had intensified again, preventing any possibility of evacuating the struggling puppies to better medical facilities. They were on their own, their resources dwindling by the hour. Jack Reynolds had spent the night alternating between monitoring his sedated son in the truck and checking on Shadow. Now he stood in the doorway, watching the second puppy's decline with the stoicism of a man who had witnessed too much death. "She's not going to make it either," he said quietly to Michael. "Shadow knows. She always knows." But, despite their desperate efforts, the second puppy died shortly after noon. Shadow's reaction was devastating. She refused to allow removal of either puppy, growling even at Emma when attempts were made to separate her from the lifeless forms. She curled protectively around all 7 puppies, living and dead, her body language defying the natural order that dictated moving on. "She needs to grieve," Jack explained, recognizing the behavior. "I've seen it before. These dogs form attachments deeper than most humans understand." The cabin's atmosphere grew oppressive with sorrow. Emma retreated into silence again, responding only to Shadow. Margaret moved mechanically through nursing duties, her eyes distant with ghosts from another time. The veterans maintained security rotations while exchanging knowing glances. They recognized grief's familiar territory. By early afternoon, Brian Reynolds had regained consciousness. Jack brought him inside, now sober and subdued, his handcuffed wrists a stark reminder of the previous night's violence. The veterans positioned themselves strategically around the room, taking no chances despite Brian's apparently altered demeanor. "I need to tell you about Shadow," Brian began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What I did to her. What happened to us." The story emerged in broken fragments. His third deployment to Syria, the civilian casualties from an intelligence failure, the nightmares that followed him home. Shadow had been his father's dog, but she'd accompanied Brian on that final mission. "She found the children first," he recalled, staring at his trembling hands. "In the rubble. Too late. Always too late. When I came home, the pills helped at first. Then they didn't. Then came the whiskey." Jack's weathered face reflected his son's pain and his own failure. "I should have seen it sooner. Should have gotten you help before." "Before I became a monster?" Brian finished. "Shadow reminded me of everything I wanted to forget. One night, during a blackout, His voice broke. "I don't even remember beating her. She never fought back, never bit me. Just took it. Like she understood." Michael watched Shadow as Brian spoke. The shepherd's ears had flattened at his voice. But instead of cowering, She had positioned herself between Brian and Emma, her protective instinct overriding her own weakness. "She ran away after I—" Brian couldn't continue. "I've been tracking her since, planning to sell the puppies to cover gambling debts. I don't deserve forgiveness." The painful confession hung in the air, a poison finally extracted but still lethal. No one spoke for several long moments. Then Margaret broke the silence, her nurse's pragmatism reasserting itself. "Those puppies need proper burial," she said firmly. "It's not right leaving them like this. Shadow needs closure, same as any mother." With Jack translating commands that Shadow would recognize from her service days, they eventually persuaded her to release the deceased puppies. Michael and Frank prepared a small grave in the backyard, using propane torches to thaw the frozen ground enough for digging. The impromptu funeral procession moved through knee-deep snow. Michael carrying the tiny bodies wrapped in soft flannel, Emma supporting Shadow, who insisted on following despite her weakness, Margaret bringing wildflowers preserved in her old botany book. Even Brian was permitted to attend under guard, his presence somehow necessary to the ritual of accountability. Jack spoke simple words over the small grave. These innocents never had their chance at life. But they knew love from their first breath to their last. May they rest in peace, and may their siblings thrive in their honor. Shadow approached the grave after the puppies were laid to rest, sniffing carefully, whining softly. She pawed gently at the disturbed earth once, twice, then turned away, acceptance in every line of her powerful body. As they made their way back to the cabin, the storm's intensity reached new, terrifying heights. Wind screamed through mountain passes, bending trees to breaking points and driving snow horizontally across their path. The temperature dropped precipitously, transforming their breath into crystalline clouds that dissipated instantly. Inside, with Brian secured but still present, the family faced the storm's fury and their own emotional devastation together. Shadow returned to her 5 surviving puppies, nurturing them with renewed determination, as if understanding that life demanded moving forward even through grief. "We've lost enough," Margaret declared, stoking the fire with gnarled but steady hands. "Not one more, not today." The fierceness in her voice carried a promise that encompassed them all, humans and animals alike, as Christmas Day waned and the century's worst blizzard unleashed its full fury upon their mountain sanctuary. Christmas afternoon faded into evening, the cabin's occupants exhausted by emotional and physical trials. Dr. Anderson monitored Shadow and her remaining puppies, while Michael attempted to restore some normalcy by distributing the modest gifts he'd hidden weeks earlier. Emma unwrapped her mother's watercolor set with subdued appreciation, though her attention remained fixed on Shadow's corner. Brian Reynolds sat apart from the others, the physical restraints removed but isolation self-imposed. His earlier confession had drained him, leaving a hollow-eyed shell of a man staring at his former partner with undisguised remorse. "There's more you should know," Brian said suddenly, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "About Shadow. About what really happened." Jack nodded encouragingly to his son. "Tell them everything, Brian. No more secrets." Brian's fingers traced invisible patterns on his leg, a nervous habit Michael recognized from veteran support meetings. "The addiction didn't start with alcohol," he began. "It was the painkillers after Fallujah. Military doctors handed them out like candy after my second tour. By the 3rd deployment, I couldn't function without them." Margaret paused her kitchen work, listening intently. As a Vietnam-era nurse, she'd witnessed the beginnings of what would become an epidemic. "When I came home, the VA cut my prescription, Brian continued. Said I was showing drug-seeking behavior. Switched to street pills, then heroin when money got tight. Dad tried interventions, rehab, everything. Jack's weathered face reflected years of helplessness. I've been searching for Shadow for over a year, not just 3 weeks, he admitted. Brian took her during my first hospital stay, claimed he needed her for emotional support. By the time I realized what was happening, they'd both disappeared. I've been tracking them across 3 states. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Michael asked. Would you have believed me? A stranger claiming his drug-addicted son abused his dog? Jack shook his head. I had to find proof first. Shadow's microchip records, service documentation. As Brian's full story emerged, Shadow watched him with inscrutable amber eyes. The shepherd who had once trusted him completely now maintained protective distance, positioning herself between the Reynolds men and Emma. Shadow saved our entire unit in Afghanistan, Brian revealed, his voice dropping to a whisper. We were pinned down near Kandahar, cut off from support. I took shrapnel in both legs. Dad was unconscious from a concussion. Shadow dragged us both to cover, then went back for 3 more men under active fire. Jack nodded confirmation. 17 bullets in the Humvee we were sheltering behind. Not one touched us because of her positioning. She's not just a dog. She's the reason 27 families still have their sons and fathers. The revelation transformed their understanding of Shadow. The extraordinary animal watching them with intelligent eyes had demonstrated heroism beyond human capacity, only to suffer abuse at the hands of someone she'd once protected. After the flood rescues, she received that civilian medal, Jack continued. She was famous locally, appeared at schools, community events. Brian used that recognition to convince people she was his when he took her. I sold her puppies before they were even conceived, Brian admitted, shame evident in every syllable, to gambling creditors. When she escaped 3 weeks ago, I panicked. Those men don't accept excuses. The confession's raw honesty hung in the air like smoke. Margaret, who had been silently absorbing the conversation, suddenly excused herself to the bathroom. No one marked her departure amid the emotional revelations. Shadow, however, raised her head, nostrils flaring. The smallest surviving puppy, the runt female with unusual brindling, suddenly began squirming away from her siblings, emitting high-pitched squeaks. "What's wrong with her?" Emma asked, concerned. Dr. Anderson checked the puppy quickly. "Nothing physically. She seems agitated about something." The tiny creature continued struggling until Shadow gently lifted her by the scruff, placing her on the floor. To everyone's astonishment, the week-old puppy began an unsteady crawl toward the hallway leading to the bathroom. "She can barely walk," Jack observed, amazed. "That shouldn't be possible yet." Shadow whined urgently, looking from Michael to the hallway and back again. When no one moved, she barked. A sharp, commanding sound utterly unlike her previous vocalizations. "Something's wrong," Michael realized, following the puppy's determined progress. The bathroom door stood ajar, silent. "Mom?" he called, knocking lightly. No response. When Michael pushed the door open, he found Margaret collapsed on the floor, her face ashen, one hand clutching her chest. "Mom!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. Dr. Anderson rushed in, medical instincts overriding veterinary specialization. "Pulse is weak and irregular," she reported after a quick assessment. "Possible cardiac event." The tiny puppy had somehow followed them, still squeaking insistently. Shadow appeared next, pushing past everyone to position herself beside Margaret, whining softly. "How long has she been taking nitroglycerin?" Michael demanded, finding a prescription bottle in Margaret's pocket. "I didn't know she was," Jack admitted. "She never mentioned heart trouble." Michael's military medical training took over. "She's having an acute cardiac episode, possibly been building for hours." The strain of emotional confrontation, physical exertion in the cold, and the stress of losing the puppies had pushed Margaret's compromised heart beyond its limits. "The landline's working again," Frank called from the kitchen. "Ambulance dispatch says no vehicles can get through for at least 8 hours." "She doesn't have 8 hours," Dr. Anderson stated bluntly. Michael made rapid calculations. Their medical supplies were limited, and his emergency training was years outdated. Margaret needed proper cardiac care immediately. "The backup generator, can we get enough power for basic monitoring?" he asked Frank. "Maybe 30 minutes worth," the veteran replied. "Fuel's nearly gone." Jack stepped forward. "I have a satellite phone in my truck, military grade. We can get a cardiologist on the line." What followed was a desperate race against time. Michael established an IV line using Dr. Anderson's veterinary supplies. Jack connected with a Denver cardiac specialist who talked them through emergency protocols. The veterans rotated generator operation to conserve fuel while maintaining power to essential equipment. Throughout it all, Shadow refused to leave Margaret's side, her body providing crucial warmth as the cabin's temperature fluctuated with power availability. Most remarkably, the tiny runt puppy remained curled against Margaret's neck, her presence seemingly more comfort than medical science could explain. "Her pulse is stabilizing," Michael announced after an hour of intervention. "Respiration's improving." When Margaret finally regained consciousness, her first words were typical of her generation's stoicism. All this fuss over an old woman's tired heart. "An old woman whose life was just saved by a puppy that shouldn't even be able to walk yet," Michael countered, relief evident in his voice. Margaret's gaze shifted to Shadow, and the tiny puppy still nestled against her. "Not the first time animals have known things we don't," she murmured. "In Nam, we had a stray that always knew which incoming choppers carried the worst casualties, would position himself at exactly the right landing pad before they were even visible." As Margaret stabilized under their improvised care, the truth of what had occurred settled upon them all. Shadow, the abused pregnant shepherd who had followed them home, had not only fought to deliver her puppies under impossible conditions, but had somehow communicated the emergency to her weakest offspring, who in turn had alerted the family. "She didn't just come to us for help," Emma said, understanding dawning in her young face. "She came to help us, too." Outside, as if responding to the crisis's resolution, the blizzard finally began to abate. The first stars appeared through breaks in the clouds, bringing with them the promise of Christmas night and the potential for rescue come morning. The mountain roads remained impassable for 3 days after Christmas. During that time, Margaret stabilized under Michael's care, her remarkable resilience belying her 72 years. The crisis had revealed her previously undisclosed heart condition, a consequence of rheumatic fever in childhood, exacerbated by decades of nursing stress and recent nursing home neglect. "Should have told you," she admitted from her makeshift recovery bed near the wood stove. "Never wanted to be a burden." "You've never been a burden, Mom," Michael replied, adjusting her medication. "You've been the backbone of this family." As Margaret recuperated, an extraordinary bond formed between her and Shadow's runt puppy, now unofficially named Scout Jr., but increasingly called Beacon for her uncanny awareness. The tiny female spent hours curled against Margaret's side, somehow sensing when the older woman's discomfort increased and alerting the family with distinctive whines. "That ain't coincidence," Frank observed after witnessing Beacon's third accurate warning of Margaret's cardiac arrhythmia. That pup's got the gift. Dr. Anderson, snowbound with them, documented the phenomenon with professional interest. There's growing research on canines detecting medical conditions. Some dogs can sense chemical changes preceding seizures or diabetic crashes. But this level of awareness in a puppy this young, she shook her head in amazement. By December 28th, county snowplows finally cleared their mountain access road. The emergency medical team arrived expecting to transport a critical patient, only to find Margaret sitting upright, playing gin rummy with Brian Reynolds while Shadow and Beacon supervised from beside her chair. "I'm not going to any hospital," Margaret informed the paramedics with the implacable determination that had carried her through war zones. "Got better care right here than any institution could provide." The paramedics, after consulting with the cardiologist still monitoring Margaret via Jack's satellite phone, reluctantly agreed. "We've never seen stabilization like this outside a cardiac unit," the lead EMT admitted. "Whatever you folks are doing, keep it up." As access to the outside world restored, the story of Shadow's rescue, traumatic delivery, and the puppy's remarkable intervention in Margaret's crisis spread beyond their mountain community. The Boulder Creek Chronicle's initial human interest piece about a Christmas miracle was picked up by Denver news outlets, then regional networks. "Hero military dog saves family who saved her," headlined across Colorado before spreading nationally. By New Year's Day, the Tyler cabin was fielding interview requests from major networks and fielding calls from veterans organizations across the country. "I don't understand all the fuss," Margaret grumbled as Michael screened another media inquiry. "Folks act like they've never seen a dog with sense before." Emma, emerging further from her shell each day, took particular interest in managing Shadow's increasing fame. "People need to know her whole story," she insisted, carefully organizing photographs and documentation with Jack's help. Not just the happy ending, but what she survived to get here. The viral attention brought unexpected consequences. A representative from Valor Service Dogs arrived in early January, offering a proposition that stunned the family: formal adoption of Shadow and professional training for her puppies as PTSD support animals for veterans. Shadow's bloodline and proven abilities make her offspring invaluable, the representative explained. With proper guidance, these puppies could help dozens of veterans struggling with trauma, like Brian. The mention of Brian's name was deliberate. The younger Reynolds had surrendered to county authorities once roads cleared, facing charges for animal cruelty and property destruction. However, his military service record and voluntary confession prompted the veterans community to advocate for treatment rather than incarceration. "He needs rehabilitation, not punishment," Jack argued at the preliminary hearing, standing beside Michael, who had surprisingly offered character testimony. "The same system that failed him after deployment can help make this right." The judge, herself the mother of a Gulf War veteran, sentenced Brian to mandatory rehabilitation, community service with animal rescue organizations, and supervised visitation with Shadow, contingent on the Tyler's approval and Shadow's comfort level. "Dogs forgive better than people," the judge noted. "Perhaps Shadow's example can guide your recovery." Financial pressures that had squeezed the Tyler family for years unexpectedly eased. The media attention attracted a veteran support foundation that offered Michael a position coordinating medical services for rural veterans, work he could perform largely from home while maintaining his caregiving responsibilities. "We've been trying to reach underserved mountain communities," the foundation director explained. "Your experience as both provider and caregiver makes you uniquely qualified." Meanwhile, Emma blossomed in ways that astonished her teachers. The formerly silent girl volunteered to give a presentation about Shadow for her school's assembly, standing before 300 students to advocate for animal rescue and trauma awareness. Sometimes the ones who've been hurt the most have the most love to give, she concluded, her voice clear and confident as Shadow sat attentively beside her. And sometimes saving someone else is how you save yourself. The standing ovation that followed marked Emma's full return to the world of words and connection. The local education board requested permission to incorporate her presentation into their curriculum on empathy and community responsibility. By spring, Shadow had fully recovered her magnificent strength. Her coal-black coat gleamed in the mountain sunshine. The physical scars of her abuse faded beneath healthy fur. The emotional scars remained evident only in specific circumstances. She still startled at raised voices, still positioned herself protectively near Emma when unfamiliar men visited. The 4 surviving puppies thrived under the combined care of the Tylers, Dr. Anderson, and Jack Reynolds, who visited weekly. True to predictions, each puppy displayed remarkable intelligence and sensitivity. Beacon, the smallest, remained inseparable from Margaret, her medical alerting abilities developing with formal training. On the anniversary of Shadow's arrival, the family hosted a gathering that would have been unimaginable the previous December. Veterans from 3 counties attended, many with service dogs of their own. Brian Reynolds came under his counselor's supervision, his 6 months of sobriety evident in clear eyes and steady hands. The most emotional moment came when Brian approached Shadow for the first time, without restraints or supervision. The gathering fell silent as the shepherd regarded her former abuser, her amber eyes inscrutable. "I don't expect forgiveness," Brian said simply, kneeling at a respectful distance. "But I want you to know that you saved me twice, once in Afghanistan, and again by bringing me to justice here." Shadow held her position for long moments, evaluating the man before her with intelligence that transcended species. Then, slowly, deliberately, she approached and briefly pressed her muzzle against his extended hand, not affection, not quite forgiveness, but acknowledgement of his journey. There wasn't a dry eye among the hardened veterans witnessing the exchange. Margaret, whose cardiac health had stabilized with proper medication and the constant company of Beacon, found purpose in establishing a local support network for elderly veterans facing institutional care. "Folks who served their country shouldn't be warehoused and forgotten," she declared, her nurse's authority undiminished by age. Her initiative, combined with Michael's medical coordination program, transformed Boulder Creek into a model community for rural veteran support. What began as one family's crisis evolved into a systemic change benefiting dozens of former service members who had fallen through bureaucratic cracks. Shadow's puppies, now grown, began their formal service dog careers with exceptional success rates. 3 entered the Valor Service Dogs program, paired with veterans struggling with PTSD. The 4th, Beacon, received specialized medical alert certification, though she remained primarily devoted to Margaret. Michael, watching his once fractured family transform, often reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that began with a bloodied shepherd following them home. His own PTSD symptoms, while not eliminated, had diminished significantly through the purpose he found in caring for Shadow and coordinating veteran services. "You know what amazes me most?" he commented to Jack during one of their regular coffee meetings. "A year ago I couldn't see any way forward. Now I can't imagine a different path." Jack nodded, understanding perfectly. Shadow always had that effect, finding roots where none seemed possible. Emma, now 13 and flourishing in school, established a junior volunteer program at Dr. Anderson's clinic. Her trauma-informed presentations expanded to include surrounding counties, her formerly silent voice now confident in advocating for both animals and humans recovering from abuse. "She's her grandmother all over again," Michael often remarked, recognizing Margaret's determination in his daughter's increasingly confident demeanor. The media eventually moved on to other stories, though Shadow retained a modest celebrity status in service dog circles. Her image appeared in training materials. Her rescue story became a case study in veterinary trauma care, and the photo of Beacon alerting to Margaret's cardiac event was featured in research publications on animal intuition. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Shadow's desperate delivery in their mountain cabin, Michael found himself standing in the doorway of their renovated living room. The scene before him embodied everything the holiday was meant to represent, not commercial perfection, but genuine peace. Margaret dozed in her favorite chair, her medication safely managed, Beacon alert at her feet. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, reading aloud to Shadow from Where the Red Fern Grows, the shepherd's head resting contentedly in the girl's lap. Scout, their original golden retriever, now moving stiffly with age, had overcome his initial jealousy to become Shadow's devoted companion. The Christmas tree, a proper blue spruce cut from their own land this year, sparkled with homemade ornaments, many fashioned by veterans during therapy sessions Michael coordinated. Beneath it lay modest gifts, each representing connection rather than obligation. Outside, the snow fell gently rather than violently, blanketing their mountain in peaceful white rather than threatening isolation. Jack and Brian would join them tomorrow, bringing dinner contributions and news of the service puppy's progress. "Look at them," Margaret murmured, not as asleep as she had appeared. "Would you ever have believed it a year ago?" Michael shook his head, emotion tightening his throat. "Not in a million years. Not in a—" The family that had once been fractured by grief, silence, and financial strain now radiated quiet strength. They had been tested by crisis and emerged not unmarked but undefeated, their wounds transformed into wisdom, their struggles into purpose. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Michael found Shadow sitting at the cabin's front window, her noble profile silhouetted against moonlit snow. She turned as he approached, her amber eyes reflecting intelligence that still occasionally took him by surprise. "Thank you," he whispered, resting his hand lightly on her powerful shoulder, "for finding us, for choosing us." Shadow leaned briefly into his touch, then returned her gaze to the snowy landscape, vigilant, protective, at peace, but ever watchful. When Michael checked on Emma before retiring, he found Shadow had slipped silently into the bedroom, positioning herself between Margaret's chair, where the older woman had dozed off again, and Emma's bed. Beacon curled protectively against Margaret's ankles, while Shadow stretched her length across the threshold, her body forming a living bridge between the generations. The tableau captured everything that had changed in their lives: protection where there had been vulnerability, connection where there had been isolation, purpose where there had been despair. Some called it a Christmas miracle. The veterans called it loyalty. Dr. Anderson called it remarkable animal intelligence. Margaret, with her nurse's pragmatism, called it just plain sense, animal or human. Michael, watching his family sleep under Shadow's vigilant protection, thought of the words Emma had used in her school presentation. "Sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they have 4 paws, a cold nose, and a heart big enough to save us all." Outside, Colorado's stars pierced the winter darkness with ancient light, bearing silent witness to the extraordinary healing that had unfolded beneath their eternal gaze. The century's worst blizzard had become the catalyst for their century's greatest blessing, proof that even in the darkest storms, with the right companions, warmth and light could always be found. When life seems its darkest, sometimes hope arrives on four paws. Shadow's journey reminds us that it's never too late for new beginnings, for finding purpose in unexpected places. Margaret found renewed meaning not through grand gestures, but through opening her heart to a wounded soul who needed exactly what she had to give, wisdom born from her own scars. The bonds formed between Shadow, Beacon, and the Tyler family speak to what we all know deep down. Healing happens in community, when we're brave enough to extend and receive love. Many of us have weathered our own storms, losing loved ones, facing health challenges, feeling displaced in a world that seems to move too quickly. Yet Shadow's story whispers the truth that our greatest contributions may still lie ahead, that our experiences, even the painful ones, uniquely qualify us to recognize and respond to others' suffering. The path forward often begins with one simple choice: to help someone else, even when we're hurting too. Have you ever experienced unexpected healing through helping another being, human or animal? Or has an animal companion ever sensed what you needed before you knew it yourself? Please share your stories in the comments. Your experience might be the light someone else needs today.